Right, so let me ping myself. Cool. All right. Thank you everyone for joining the event today. So my name is Kung Peng. I'm the Vice President of Stanford Blockchain Club, and also the Director of Stanford Blockchain Accelerator Program. So this is actually part of the educational series of the Accelerator Program that want to let the Stanford blockchain community know more about crypto, and so that in the near future they would get a full-time job or become entrepreneur in the blockchain space. I will probably through after our mailing list that you can subscribe to, and also the Discord channel you can get, you can join there as well, so you can get information for future events. So today is a great honor to have Michael Anderson, the co-founder of Framework Ventures, join us and share with us his view and perspective of DeFi from a top DeFi VC perspective. So yeah, I think Michael, you can just go ahead, do probably like an intro and also some background on Framework Ventures.
Yeah, definitely. Well, excited to be here and excited to share more about Framework and the fun space that we get to operate in every day. I'm just going to start with a quick background on myself and have that storyline describe more about Framework, and then we can share more about what we view as sort of our investment thesis, and then would love to have questions for everybody here. So I'm originally from Palo Alto, actually. I went to Palo Alto High School. I went to the East Coast for college and studied economics and computer science, and then came back to San Francisco right after graduation. I was always fascinated by the intersection of both finance and technology, and ended up joining Dropbox to work as a product manager, where my team was focused mostly on what we call the monetization platform. So payments, commerce, and billing, kind of the old world of fintech. We were in charge of building out at Dropbox. This was 2013, 2014, and I was going to meetups for Ethereum fans or talking about smart contract technology, and really kind of fell down the rabbit hole, mostly as a hobbyist, watching from the sidelines with the blockchain technology world kind of maturing, and ended up switching jobs, moving to Los Angeles, and worked at Snapchat for a number of years as a product manager there. I got to know my co-founder, soon to be co-founder, Vance. He was at Netflix at the time. And we actually, in 2017 saw what was happening with non-fungible tokens, and saw that it was the new potential consumer application platform. We were probably a couple of years too early, but we ended up starting a non-fungible token platform for professional athletes, a digital collectible platform called Hashleets, where we had a license with the NFL to build football player related digital collectibles, and you'd be able to play them in fantasy style sports. Essentially the 3-year too early version of what is now Top Shot, and had a lot of fun building that product, and knew the Dapper team well, knew the OpenSea team very well. And ultimately in 2019, not many people were using Ethereum for consumer applications. So we ended up selling the business and moving on to what is now Framework. Really kind of the thesis that we saw with Framework at the time was that there wasn't a venture firm that was form fit for the digital asset space. And what I mean by this is there were hedge funds that were investing in these digital assets, and they had a liquid strategy, which ultimately your investment mandate dictates what your kind of investment strategy becomes. And then traditional venture firms were just not able to either custody or not really thinking about the digital asset side of this entire ecosystem. And so we kind of thread the gap on that, and we started Framework really with the thesis that a venture thesis for digital assets would be kind of the new paradigm of what is now crypto VC. The other aspect and the other part of the thesis that we had is that to be, value additive as you want to be from a venture perspective, the same types of things that work for companies are just not going to work for digital assets and digital ecosystems. We view these as open source networks, where there's a digital token as the value accrual mechanism, but also the coordination mechanism. And when you're thinking about how do you grow and how do you enhance distribution, being on the board and talking about partnerships and M&A opportunities are just not the types of conversations that matter. It's about what type of software can you build? What types of infrastructure can you run? How do you bootstrap engagement? How do you start a community from scratch? These types of questions were really kind of the things that the entrepreneurs in the digital asset space were thinking through. But that's where we thought we would be value additive as a venture investor. And so Framework is two parts. Framework is the venture side, which is just a series of venture funds at this point. But the other part of it is what we call Framework Labs. And Framework Labs is, it's about 20 plus people now, and it's mostly engineering. We're running a lot of infrastructure. So largest graph node indexing node on the graph network. We run Chainlink nodes, we run Ethereum 2 nodes, we're running a fair amount of blockchain infrastructure. We're also trading, staking and providing liquidity into a number of the ecosystems that we invested in. So I think one of the things that differentiates us is we just want to be closest to the metal, both in terms of where we're investing, which is usually at the earliest stages and all the way up through Series B type investments, but also from a user or a customer or supplier side of these different networks. We're going to be the ones that are helping to bootstrap as much as we possibly can, and we're going to do that through software. So having that hands-on approach, I think, is differentiated for what you'd see with most traditional venture funds. In terms of our thesis, we started with our first fund in 2019. I'd say we're probably the first ones to go full in 100% into DeFi. Really, DeFi was kind of the only thing that we saw working at that time, the only thing that had product market fit at that time. So we have, some of our core investments in that first fund are, assets like Aave, Synthetics, Chainlink, some of the kind of big DeFi protocols. Tokemak was one of the ones that we backed in that fund as well. There's a number of other, there are 26 investments in that fund. What has changed, though, I think, is over the last, call it 6 to 9 months, what has become very apparent is that DeFi is not the only application category that really matters now. And so we raised our second fund earlier this year. I'd say that's probably about 50% DeFi, 50% smattering of games, non-fungible tokens, social tokens, kind of the consumer applications that actually, we started our careers working on in the blockchain space. So kind of going back to our roots in that respect. But we're about 50-50 at this point, and excited to see what new opportunities come. I think it'll probably continue to be a lot of DeFi, but DeFi becomes kind of the infrastructure layers that enable things like social tokens, enables things like play to earn games. It's kind of DeFi masquerading as a consumer application through a game. But that's the way that we see it right now. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, a little bit about Framework and kind of our thesis. Would love to kind of turn it over for questions.
Awesome. Thank you for the great introduction. So what we'll do is we'll have like two parts. Like the first part will be more like the question we collected from the audience before the event, like through the Google Forms. And then second part, we'll just open the floor for questions, live questions.
Great.
All right, cool. So I will actually think like categorize some of the question into like 3 buckets. One's more from like a generic, like a DeFi view, and then we'll dive more to the crypto VC, and then more specifically to Framework. Just curious about, I think you mentioned a little bit also, like your view of DeFi. Since like all of a sudden, like last year, the DeFi summer, right? For people who don't closely follow crypto, it's just out of nowhere, that just big bang, like boom, and then huge TVL, huge growth. So I'd like to hear your opinion on DeFi, and then some of the like why DeFi is a thing, why it's like able to attract so much DeFi in such a short time.
Yeah. So I think there's a number of ways that we look at DeFi, and really kind of decentralized finance, I think, is a fine term. What was probably a better term back in the day would have been open source finance. And when you think about open source and the ways that open source has developed over the last 30 years, a lot of what it is just kind of loosely configured groups of people that are helping to contribute towards a unified cause. What we now have in the form of a token is an incentive layer, as well as a coordination mechanism that enables all of this incentivizing of cooperation and collaboration that you would have at a technology company like Google or Facebook. And so now we have kind of layers of incentives, but you also have the world distribution of talent to be able to work on coordinated problems. And if we think about what finance has in the ways of technology stack over the last 40 years, it's largely been unchanged. It's basically the internet, or even eras of technology that predate the internet, as the things that are underpinning the American Express charge when you swipe that credit card. And it's kind of amazing to think that basically nothing has changed. But what we now have with DeFi is the first developer sandbox for building applications that are financial in nature, but also able to be distributed on a blockchain, at least now, to hundreds of thousands or millions of monthly active users. And each one of those users is a very high valued user with a lot of assets on chain and ability to try new products, try new things. And so that's where you see kind of the TVL actually become a relevant metric. What we get really excited about is not only just taking an existing model like an options platform or a derivatives platform or a synthetic asset platform, but actually where you take things that are just not absolutely possible in the traditional financial world. And a great example here would be Uniswap, where I personally cannot become a market maker because I don't have the technology, I don't have the capital, or basically the time. But if I wanted to put ETH and USDC into a Uniswap v3 collateral pool, I'd be able to become an automated market maker with very little sophistication. And sure, there's ways of optimizing that, but that democratization, I think, is a really powerful concept. And so as we think about what new models can actually come about, like Tokamak, like Uniswap, where you're taking existing models, you're breaking down the moats, and you're allowing any individual to have access, that is where we get really excited. And we consider this to be sort of financial innovation. And this level of innovation is brought about by the orders of magnitude reduction in cost and time and effort that we now have to create financial products. And that's essentially what DeFi is. What I think DeFi could become is financial inclusion, where as the user experience of blockchain, which currently is pretty garbage, to be honest, as that user experience, as that ease of use gets better and better, people who have generalized internet connections that have an incentive to participate in the financial world, that don't necessarily have the same property rights that we do living in the United States or being in the United States, we actually get access or provide access to what those basic property rights could bring about for those people all over the world. And so we're not there yet, and I think that's sort of the next leg up, or the real potential for this industry. We've tested a lot of things with synthetic equities, synthetic derivatives, synthetic fixed income, and those are ways for us to provide access. But there's 1.9 billion people in the world that have a high-speed internet connection but no access to a bank account. Like that is kind of an absolute market sizing that we should be going after. It's just going to take time, and so that's kind of how we break down the world of DeFi: is financial innovation and then eventually financial inclusion.
Great, thank you for the great answer. So it's interesting that you mentioned that like the financial inclusion side, right? Because I think it's like over 30% of global population still like unbanked, right? So there's a lot of people who think that the DeFi might help those unbanked population just like mobile phone helped them to skip just the internet, skip the computer age and jump into the mobile phone age to get access on internet. So that's very exciting. And then my next question is more like, as this DeFi thing keep growing, and we saw the huge jump on TVL and become bigger and bigger, and also the inclusion, we include more and more global populations. What's your view, like the future of DeFi in terms like the resilience, right? If you're a financial system, if you think about the traditional financial system, we go through a financial cycles, right? It will be crisis, and then boom again. So what's your thought there? Maybe the composability and the capital efficiency of DeFi might hurt when actually it has like a financial crisis.
Yeah, so there's a lot of points in there. So first off, I think the most powerful concept within DeFi is something you touched upon, but it's worth double clicking into, which is composability. Nobody is stopping or preventing anyone from building an application on top of Uniswap or on top of tokemak or on top of synthetics, and that's just what an open permissionless blockchain enables. And that level of development is something that when you compare an organization like Uniswap or an organization like Coinbase, Uniswap and Coinbase both have the same core functions, which is swapping assets, one asset for another. They do about the same amount of volume every single day, but Coinbase has about 4,500 employees and Uniswap has about 35. And that level of leverage and amplification is what a blockchain enables, because you don't have to worry about who's running the servers, who's maintaining the code base, who's doing developer operations, and it's all covered when you're building on top of an open permission blockchain like Ethereum. And so that, I think, can't be understated. But what we're also looking at here is when you think about, okay, well, how do we bridge the gap between traditional finance and decentralized finance? And I think that is one thing that, there are a lot of major financial institutions who are looking at DeFi and saying, how do we do that? But what it really takes to be able to do that is, it's not like Coinbase can say, okay, you know what, we're going to decentralize. We're going to fire 95% of our employees and we're going to go build on top of Ethereum and recreate everything. You have to start from the ground up. And this is like core innovator's dilemma. And so I think you're going to see that there are centralized entities that want to bridge or plug into DeFi in some way, shape, or form. They're not going to be the biggest players in the space, just in the same way that the biggest companies that are now what we would consider, internet companies are not companies that predated the start of the internet. They're companies that were born through the internet. And I think we're going to see the same thing with DeFi. But the other kind of elephant in the room that has yet to be figured out and is basically every single week now is what's the regulatory environment, and what does DC say? That's something that is going to take years, frankly. And it might take legislative action, it might take enforcement actions, and it'll probably be a bumpier road than anybody expects, or at least what we've seen so far. But it's something that we spend a lot of our time working on, whether it's through our legal team or through our regulatory efforts. But it's something that is going to have to be cleared out for us to figure out what the future of DeFi is as it relates to traditional fintech or traditional finance. But I think the big things that'll work are the companies that have the capital, have the resources to enable that capital efficiency and to enable those new product categories. But they won't be able to touch it until they figure out what the regulatory situation is. And so I think we need to figure out that first. And in the next year or two, I think we'll get clarity there.
I see. So the next question is also like from the high level, like since you are like a part of the top DeFi funds in DeFi VC fund in the space, and wondering like what are some of the areas that you think could be like interesting opportunities, because this is also part of accelerator programs, like ideas that like basically I think you probably have a lot, but maybe like top 3 or top 1 idea that students should work on, and if they have it, you would invest.
Top 3 is tough because there's actually a lot. So I think what we have seen so far is the basic primitives have started to get figured out. You have basic swap, you have basic derivatives. You're starting to see some borrow lend that's working at a capital efficient level, and capital efficiency is getting better and better. But oddly enough, and using the corollary of the internet, I think the way that the internet actually became a viable business is the second that you added identity to it. And this may be a little bit sacrilege for the crypto anarchists perspective, but I think you actually do need KYC and identity for this to actually go towards finance, as opposed to kind of live in this decentralized corner of the internet. And that identity provider that ultimately won the internet was Google and Facebook. So, think about it on that scale. And so I think what we're going to start to see is you're going to need to have identity be a core variable. But once you have that, you enable under collateralized borrow lend. You enable kind of the ability to have large transactions and trust, the counterparty that you're working with. And so, in the same way that the mobile phone with a digital camera, or the digital camera itself, brought about something like social media, we need to wait for something like that, like identity, to unlock or open up the aperture lens of what's feasible. And so identity is one of those things that we are looking at, we are trying to figure out. Many others are as well. But that's a really, really hard problem to solve. And it doesn't have to be, identity provider that you trust with your information and then connects you to a wallet. It could be something that zero knowledge technology, helps enable. And there are actual, cryptographic ways of doing this that make sense. And so that's one of them. The other stuff, just from a core product perspective, the biggest thing that I think we are missing is basic smart contract insurance. The ability to have capital efficient smart contract insurance marketplace. It's just drastically lacking at this point. And historically, if you look at any insurance market, whether it's, residential, car, property and casualty, whatever it is, whatever that product category is, it usually lags the market by 3 to 4 years. And so if we need it now, I would expect that insurance becomes viable in the next 3 to 4 years. And we've talked to a number of, traditional insurance providers. We've backed a number of decentralized insurance marketplace providers. They're all doing well. None of them are breaking out. Even Nexus Mutual, is doing fine, but it really isn't covering in the same way that it needs to be. So that would just be kind of like an open-ended question with insurance in general. And then, kind of the other category that I would point to is, and this is category not necessarily defined, but it's more of the exotic type scenario-based products, financial products. So whether it's, a real options platform where you can delta hedge the liquidity pool, that's something that doesn't exist yet. If you can have a really interesting derivatives product that's covering something like, crops or something in the real world that is targeted towards a certain specific market, that's really valuable as well. And so we're starting to see the regionalization or the product specification or product definition of what markets people are going after, as opposed to let's just build a generalized options marketplace. And so I think regulatory arbitrage becomes kind of an advantage here. And so if you have the ability to have a fiat on-ramp for a South American region, that is a moat that really does matter. So I'd point to those as maybe 3 categories, but there's so much in between. You could, roll a rock down the road and hit something on the way.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. But the students are already taking a lot of notes and doing research afterwards. Cool. Yeah.
On my end, to your point about real identity, at what degree of fidelity do you think this, how real would this digital identity be? Would it be like a true digital identity, something along the lines of like a Facebook? Or I guess in the realm of DeFi, is having a financial credit score enough of identity for people to transact and build trust? What do you think this looks like on chain?
So the product is dictated by what the identity solution is. And so if you're talking about real identity with credit worthiness or credit history or employment verification, that can get you to under collateralized borrow lend. so long as there's a closing of the feedback loop that enables, some retribution for like people who aren't paying their bills. And that starts to look a lot more like, a lending club or a SoFi, but all done on chain and therefore probably more efficient. And probably sourcing more capital because you have the international sourcing of capital as opposed to, the source of capital that they use. So that's number one. Number two, you can also have things that are very kind of, I would call them information light. So using zero knowledge proofs, or Chainlink is a great example of. They have this technology that enables you to ask questions to a centralized provider secured by TLS, and it's not really anything that says anything other than yes or no. So like, can this person come into this bar? Are they over the age of 21? Yes, they are. Does it tell you how old they are? No, but it answers the question. And so you can kind of form fit those types of questions to give as much information as needed, but not more than is necessary. And so I think that, is really kind of how I think about what the products are enabled. It's just really kind of like what information is needed, and anything can be done. It's how much people are willing to give up.
Yeah, and also feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions if there's any point that Mike mentioned that you're just want to have follow-up questions, or like throw your question to the chat as well. So go ahead, Natalie, you unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for joining us, Michael. I'm a first-year MBA student here, and my background is in back-end engineering, and I've been digging deeper and deeper into the NFT space. Anyway, I'm curious, you mentioned like access to liquidity for NFTs in particular, and why, obviously your investment strategy dictates, or rather, sorry, I'm really sick right now. My mind's so scrambled. Basically, what you owe to your investors dictates your liquidity strategy. Oh, wow, sorry, 1 second. Plane just flew overhead. Anyway, I'm curious, obviously NFTs are incredibly illiquid, and it sounds like you were pretty early on this. I'm curious what your thoughts are on liquidity through fractionalization or through exposure to some of these ERC20s like ApeDAO's token or SquiggleDAO's token or some of those other tokens.
Yeah, great question. So a couple of things there. What I meant originally by your investment mandate dictates your investment strategy is, we run venture funds, and there are hedge funds who have a liquid investment mandate, which means, you can have your investors, or in the case of, other funds, their investors actually call back their money. Whereas in a venture fund, you're locked up for 10 years and you get to have kind of investment mandate of 10 years and you can distribute when you want. And that as the investment manager, you kind of have that long-term bias just based on the fact that you have 10 years. Whereas if you have 1 year or 2 years, it changes the way you think about it every single time you put money behind something. And so that's what I meant with that. But to your second point on NFTs, fractionalization is just a nice way of saying securitization. Like you can try and dress it up in any way you want, but like that's ultimately what it comes down to. You can have 100 shares of a company. You can also have 100 shares of an NFT. And in many cases, those will look very security-like. So I'd say you have to be really careful in that respect. It'll probably be a while before regulators are really kind of caught on to this. They're still kind of sorting through DeFi and what that means. But like expect that will probably be the case. DAOs are an interesting model because what you're really talking about is total green space in terms of what entity that is. Like, is that a company? Is it an organization? Is it a partnership? There's not real clarity around how to think of that. And in the case of a partnership, there are actually ways that you can look at an ownership interest in a partnership not as a security, and that interest is not a security. And so there's a lot of stuff happening in Wyoming in particular about how you can kind of take a DAO and actually have it be recognized as an LLC. And then there's a number of companies that are working on how you can actually think about a DAO more as a partnership model and something that just kind of like lives in the world. doesn't really have a legal entity. And we've backed a number of DAOs that have no company behind them. There's no bank accounts, there's no employment contracts, and we're putting millions of dollars behind it, and getting tokens in return. And so there's just a ton of different models. I think tokens was the most fascinating subject in crypto over the last 4 years, 5 years. Looking forward, DAOs are going to be the most fascinating subject.
So just one quick follow-up on that. It sounds like then you're saying an ERC-20 issued by like a fractional.art is you would see as differently than an ERC-20 issued by a DAO that's an LLC in Wyoming under like that does KYC checks and things like that, or no?
I am not.
I know it's pretty case by case.
Nor do
I'm
I
just wondering
pretend to
where
be
the line is,
Facts and circumstances for every single one of these situations. It really depends on what that token can do, what that token represents, what it's redeemable for, what functionality it has. All of those are majorly important variables into what that kind of asset looks like and how it should be, viewed in the eyes of regulators or users or consumers or investors. And so, yeah, I would not be able to make a clear line distinction.
Yeah, I have the same take. I think these organizations are running some pretty massive risks. So anyway, thanks.
Yep, thank you. Adrian?
Yeah. Hi, Michael. Thanks for joining the meeting, and it's very insightful. And actually, I have a really specific question about the AMM. So it seems right now most of the AMM are like the exchange rate is determined by the reserves of two assets, right? So, but some investor might suffer from the slippage if they want to execute a large order. And I saw Framework's published article about the time-weighted AMM. So I think that certainly solves some problem. But I'm also wondering if it makes sense, probably like use an oracle to decide the exchange rate. So yeah, I'm wondering, have you ever heard of any of project doing this, like doing this approach, or what's the pros and cons for this approach?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, a TWAP is going to be useful for kind of large, high slippage transactions. I think one of the better models that I've seen so far, and then you can also have a collateral pool with an Oracle feed for synthetic assets in the form of synthetics, and synthetics would be kind of a great example of a platform and an asset creation mechanism that is just an Oracle feed. Synthetics is actually working on a model where they would combine the TWAP plus an Oracle and kind of give a best execution price for the asset itself. So you would have slippage barriers in terms of, you wouldn't be able to mint a $1 trillion worth of synthetic ETH, but it would also be something that doesn't have the full slippage of a just pure AMM. And so it would rely on both. And God, I can't remember the number of the proposal off the top of my head, but if you go to synthetics improvement proposals and look for TWAP Oracle, I'm sure you'd be able to find it.
I see. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Thank you. Next one is Jane. You can just unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for being here. My question is, as a new VC fund, what are your specific value adds to these crypto startups? And also, I can understand for those really good ones, investors kind of have to compete, in order to get an opportunity to invest in those companies. So how do you differentiate yourself to get those really good deals? Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, crypto VC has never been more competitive than it is right now. Well, so I was describing earlier, Framework Ventures, or Framework is one part ventures, one part, Framework Labs. And Framework Labs is really kind of the X factor where, if you're a DeFi protocol, if you're an NFT platform, and you say, hey, here's my idea, here's how much I'm raising. I really want to have people who are bought in to what we're doing and can help us from the ground up, bootstrap engagement, bootstrap growth, we have the opportunity to be, one of the largest traders. If you're a decentralized exchange, we could be one of the largest suppliers of assets. If you're a lending protocol, for instance, or if you're building something that requires running blockchain infrastructure like the Graph and Chainlink, we can be an infrastructure solution for you. And so, we are basically one part tech company, one part venture fund. And I think that's where you're going to start to see a lot of crypto VC start to just migrate towards, because you recognize that to have that value add is a table stakes at this point. I'd like to think that we were the first ones to kind of pioneer that concept. And so we get kind of maybe the idea credit for that. The other part too is just like, we live and breathe this 24/7, and crypto Twitter is where I live. And so I think having people that you're working with who are in the trenches with you as much as the core founding team is a very, very differentiated proposition than a traditional venture firm that would say, check in with you every 3 months and figure out what you're doing every board meeting. And that's about it. What we like to do with the companies that we back or the DAOs that we back are set up either weekly or bi-weekly meetings and actually go through whatever they happen to be going through during that period of time. And it could mean anything from like co-founder therapy to thinking about a go-to-market strategy, writing a token economic proposal, doing another fundraise. We've kind of run the gamut at this point. So we've seen a lot of things and could be helpful in a lot of different ways.
That's very helpful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Next one, Daniel.
Hi, Michael. Hi again. Sorry for jumping the gun for the last question. I was just very excited about real identity on chain. So 2 questions this time. The first is just going back to the real identity points. Have you seen any projects with NFTs and creating some sort of like implied social identity? Because with NFTs, people claim ownership over, buying this asset at a certain time, and they're known as like a real quantity for that. So that's the first question. And the second question is, what do you see as some of the biggest problems facing DAOs right now? Or framed differently, what are some valuable businesses or protocols that are in the DAO space that you wish were being built?
Yeah, so to answer this first one first, there's a company that we backed called Teller, who's actually doing under collateralized lending, where the assets don't ever leave kind of a series of smart contracts. So you can have non-identity under collateralized lending, but you can only use the assets in very specific ways. And right now it's yield farming, or you can kind of like pre-buy or like pay over time for something like Ethereum. So they've got some interesting models, but they're leveraging NFTs that are non-transferable, that would get put into your actual address, that would start to build up effectively a credit score. And this could come from all the different things that you can imagine. So paying back, things that you borrowed, paying your interest, activity that you have, like DGen score is kind of a social credit that you can use to evaluate how engaged in the community is somebody. And you can also tie your real world NFT to your, you can tie your real world identity to your NFT, and that's an opt-in option. But there's all these different kind of things that you can layer on to start to build a cohesive understanding that frankly starts to look like Plaid, but for blockchain. And coincidentally, they're partnering with Plaid to do real world verification of things. And so I think Teller's a great example there. And in terms of DAOs, the areas of opportunity, one of the things that we're starting to see a lot of is just like all the different SaaS services that you can imagine for a startup: payroll, equity management, having legal coverage, accounting services. Like all of those things are starting to become services that are specifically sold to DAOs, because you have a unique set of problems in the way that a DAO is structured and people are incentivized. I'm of the belief that DAOs will probably represent greater than 20% of global GDP in the next probably 30 to 40 years. In the same way that you look at small business, and the LLC that was created in 1976 is the way that most small businesses work today, and they have about the same amount of GDP, at least from a US standpoint. And so I think we're going to start to see a lot of value and a lot of people start to work for DAOs as a full-time thing. And that just means that all the services, all the capabilities that you would have for a small business or a startup are just going to start to move over in that direction. The other stuff that means is, what is it like to work from home? What is it like to, potentially work for 3 DAOs at the same time and just be a designer working on 3 different projects? Like, that's absolutely supported. And it's just a different model. And so the future of work starts to look like the future of DAOs. And I'm sure you can think about all those types of things that would come up from that perspective. But that's definitely my belief.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Vivek.
Hey, Michael, thanks for being here. 2 questions for you. One sort of from the career side, another from something you mentioned earlier. On the career side, do you have any advice for folks who are non-technical but have been interested in the space, and what sort of roles you think are natural fits for them, both within an organization like Frameworks, which is within venture, or on the lab side, and then more generally in the space? So that's question number 1.
Sure. So I think, if we think about the 4 quadrants that we use to evaluate a deal, it's kind of the first 3 are the ones that you would expect. What's the product, what's the market, what's the team? The third one, and I would probably the fourth one, and I'd probably put it as the most valuable, is what does the community look like? Open source is really defined by what the community is. It's, what are you talking about in the forums? Who's answering customer support questions? Who are the ones that are actually doing the business development deals? And then, that's kind of like a natural organic process. And spending just like hours in Discord or hours in Telegram is a great way to get an understanding, but also a great way to start to be a contributor. And so one of the things that I say is like community management is almost as important as like Solidity engineer for a DeFi protocol. And I think of them as kind of like the first 2 people that you want to bring onto the team as you're thinking about growing from that core founding team. So that's what I would say is just like comms, community, which turns into business development, customer support, like partnerships, treasury management, all that type of stuff, I think is really, really important and doesn't require you to write a line of code. The stuff that I think also kind of generally will start to become really interesting, and going back to the DAO point is, I think there's going to be a role for, and this sounds kind of weird, but like DAO politicians, who are people who really deeply understand, some angle or some approach, or have a background that, lends credibility to them being a part of an organization. And then they basically raise their hand and say, I want to be voted on and be someone who just like sits on this council, sits on this, governance board, or just like is a an active, engaged member of this community, and maybe gets voted on as like an ambassador in some way, shape, or form. And each one of those communities is going to define what those roles are, but that I think is just a great way to get involved, and then a great way to get recognized for your involvement.
Awesome. The other quick question I had was, it caught my attention that you mentioned financial inclusion being the next sort of vanguard of DeFi. Sounds like you all have done a lot of thought about that. In addition to reaching the 1.7 globally unbanked, which is, sort of a gargantuan undertaking in of itself, what specific things have you all thought about as far as blockchain or just DeFi or the wealth created by it that could be used for the social good?
Yeah. So I don't think it's going to be financial applications that attract the unbanked. And frankly, I think it's going to be things that look more like games that bring people into DeFi. And so I think Axie Infinity actually has like a real kind of weird way of like bringing more people into DeFi than DeFi does. And so that's kind of the ways that I think that it will happen. The things that I think that we need to do to help it is really just like ease of user experience. My parents still don't know how to use MetaMask, and like, they're not going to learn, they're not going to feel comfortable with it. And so I think we need to build applications that rethink the ways that people interface with blockchains. Like I still can't even confirm a transaction on my iOS device. Like that's embarrassing. And so from an entrepreneurial perspective, those are the types of things that we need to back. And then in terms of product categories, making it really simple, and maybe this means, leveraging distribution of something like a Twitter. where you basically have kind of a built-in bank account where you can just store value and have a regulated stable coin instead of having local currency. And having that be something that just lives on chain, but also is distributed through something like a Twitter or maybe even a Facebook if DM ever comes out of the ashes. Those types of things I think are just like step change function differences. But ultimately, from an engagement and entrepreneurial perspective, we just need to improve the UX.
All right, thank you. So the next, Jeremy, go ahead.
Hey, Michael. Really, really interesting. So we were kind of chatting about DeFi passports, as one way to kind of solve the under collateralization issue. And another way is obviously permissioned pools, right? If we're thinking, how do we let like institutional capital into this space? And Aave Arc made a big splash when they announced their permission pool stuff, and I haven't heard much about it since. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on like where institutional liquidity stands right now? And does this permission pool stuff, will that be a bridge to providing liquidity in the broader ecosystem, or how do you think that's going to fit in?
Yeah. Well, no surprise, it all comes down to regulations. When you're a bank, you need to know every single one of your customers. When you put your own capital into a pool, you need to know that every other person that has put money into that pool is not, from some jurisdiction, and the list is any OFAC country essentially, and so that's what Aave Arc really is. I think where it could go is really dependent on how quickly we can move in terms of regulatory clarity. Is there kind of a safe harbor for people that are putting into an anonymized pool or putting into a pool where you don't actually know the funds and they're commingled and it's all on chain and one of the lines that I always think about is just digging deeper into understanding more about what regulators do. I think the role of regulators in the future will transition from financial oversight of opaque institutions into code review, because what they're really trying to do is make it safe and fair for everybody who's involved. And this should be the most regulatory friendly thing. It just gets a bad rep because it's really complicated. And so people get scared of complication. And so education is going to be helpful, but institutions are also moving very, very slow. And Aave Arc has a lot of potential. Aave is working on a ton of different products. Arc is one of them. But I think it's going to move at the speed of sort of like regulations, but also institutions. And that's just fundamentally slower than software.
Right. Next, Natalie again. Go ahead. You're on mute. You're on mute. Unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. You're a lot more bullish on DAOs than I am. I'd say 20% of whatever you said. I think global GDP, I think is significant. In part because I think every DAO I've ever been a part of has been basically in complete disarray, because the decentralized model obviously lends itself to a lack of structure, and some of that is advantageous and some of that is disadvantageous. I'm curious, because you see a lot more of these promising DAOs probably than I do. How do you see DAOs doing things like building a AAA gaming title or building out really advanced functionality that you need a centralized vision for, and what works well and what doesn't?
Yeah, so well, to answer the first part, my job is trying to come up with the craziest ideas, and when it's really kind of fringe and crazy and messy, that stuff is usually where innovation happens. At least I've seen. And so when it's messy and crazy is actually probably a good sign. It'll take time to figure out, but we're talking about a trajectory arc of 30 to 40 years here. In terms of when it does work, and Pleaser DAO or any of the DAOs are I think are the messiest and probably the most disorganized. And do they have staying power to last through this trajectory arc? Probably not. The ones that I'm referring to are the Synthetics DAO, which is governed by 3 different inter-DAOs that own different parts of the decision-making process. They got about $1 billion under management, which means they're going to last for a long time. They're going to be able to hire a ton of people. And they're building a protocol and a platform that I think could potentially rival, or become basically a decentralized finance in a lot of ways. And in terms of how I've seen this work in other places, we've actually a company called Alluvium, and Alluvium is building that AAA rated game, at least from the artwork that I've seen and kind of the trailers that I've seen. It has the potential to be that. They have 162 people working on it, and that's all governed and managed and operated through a DAO. And I think Alluvium actually kind of gives me the most hope, because what you have, there's 162 people working on it right now. There's been over 400 people that have contributed to it in some way, shape, or form. And this could mean, like a month of artwork work, or just like a small gig, or, I have someone who's working on this specific graphic. You can have that bite-sized piece of work that doesn't necessarily require full-time employment from a company. And that's where I see there being a huge advantage with the future of work in DAOs, because you can work at your own pace, you can work from multiple places. You can take your skills. If you're a product designer at Google, you probably work, really 3 hours a day. The rest of the time is in meetings. The rest of the time is kind of moving from one job to the other, and maybe you have multiple things you're doing, and maybe there's times where you cram, but there's a lot of time that's lost, from your skill that you're actually providing. And so that's kind of the other efficiency gain that I think, about where you can kind of context switch from multiple projects at the same time, like you are an architect, or, I guess an architect's probably the best example, but that is something that I kind of think of when I think of DAOs.
And then just to make it more specific, even what has worked well, or what do you think would work well for an actual incentive structure, in terms of just purely like, if you have 160 devs working on something, do you issue a governance proposal every time to for each new dev? Do you issue one and then this is the base rate? Is that all transparent? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so the more decentralized you get, the slower decisions are made. And so you need to think about how you want to decentralize over time. Decentralizing over time maybe slows things down, but adds more perspective. And so each one of these things, there is no here's the corporate board, here's corporate officer, this is what a CEO does. There's no models that fit right now across two DAOs probably. And so I think we'll probably get to those models eventually, but right now every single one of them is like a snowflake and very unique. And so my perspective is the things that work are, frankly, whatever the norms of the community become the models of governance. And so it's based on norms, and every single thing is differently. Like if you have Kane from Synthetics and he's saying, here's how we're going to have the Treasury DAO, here's how we're going to have the Spartan Council, we've got this, the protocol DAO who actually controls the upgrade path. The things that you need to vote on are when there's an actual synthetics improvement proposal, this has to go to the Spartan Council. If it's an SECP and it's just a little variable change that doesn't need to go through that control, all that stuff is being figured out, but it took time to figure that stuff out for LLCs too.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Brave new world.
Yep. All right. Thank you. William, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Michael, for this. Quick question. You talked about NFT, bringing people in probably more than into crypto, more than DeFi. Just want to hear your thoughts on, these meme coin, for example, Doge, Shiba Inu, very serious kind of discussion way. Like, what do you think their role is in the ecosystem, and in the their role in the future as well?
I think that meme coins that don't actually provide any value are fundamentally uninteresting, and frankly do a disservice to the rest of the industry. And so not a fan of Doge, not a fan of Shiba. I think maybe they bring some people in, and if that is actually happening, that's great. But I've yet to meet anybody who's serious in crypto that says Doge was the way that they got into crypto. And so I think mostly it's for kind of a short-term speculative mindset.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we have 3 minutes. So actually I have a question that's probably going to be very relevant for the future participants of our accelerator program that will launch the winter quarter, like January. So it's more generic. So it's like equity round against a token round. What's your take on that? And also for people or company that have already raised the equity round, what's your view on them raising a token round?
Yeah. So it's very, very difficult to do both. And in many cases, what we've seen is people will raise an equity round. They'll decide that a token is actually better for the decentralized network that they're building. And maybe, Compound Labs, for instance, or Uniswap Labs are good examples here where Compound launched the Com token. They're also launching the Compound chain. You can have a traditional startup, traditional company launch multiple things. You just have to do it in a way that makes sense and is fair for everybody. And so that gets a little bit complicated in and of itself. If you're building something that's totally decentralized and the company is literally going to dissolve eventually, you can raise money through a company, but then you have to start with the end in mind that you're going to dissolve the company or turn it into a foundation eventually. And then where we like to play, we're probably about 80% of our investments, or maybe 85% of our investments are just token denominated, or there will be a token at the end. But we, have backed a number of companies that are just companies and have no plans, nor do they want to, nor should they, have a token. And so it really depends on what the company is, what it's doing, and where you think the value will accrue. There are a lot of advantages to having equity versus a token, and vice versa.
Awesome. Just to wrap up, do you have any departing words or thoughts to a student who go and fund their startups in crypto space?
I think this is the most fun thing to be working on right now. And I'm definitely biased, but I also spent a number of years in the traditional technology world. And it's sort of like once you have the red pill, you can't go back. And so it's just really fun to be working in a space that you actually get to be at the start of. And I think that's kind of a once in a generation opportunity if you're interested in that space.
Awesome. Actually, we have one more. Is that a quick question, Jeff? We are kind of short in time.
Okay. It's like 15 seconds, I guess.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it's a 15-second question. I'm not sure about the answer.
Okay.
No hard stop in mind.
Thanks, Michael, for taking the time. A lot of people have said that DeFi is really bringing Wall Street into a distributed format, which I think is pretty cool. Banks are the functions of a bank are useful, but maybe the bank itself is not, and all the Wall Street guys are not. How much of this is really true that you can actually do this, and how much of it is kind of smokes and mirrors, and really you do need the bankers?
Well, it depends on what function you're kind of describing. But I think traditional investment banking, where you're helping a company go through a public offering or helping advise a M&A transaction, that's a people business, just in the same way that consulting is. If you're looking at basic, I put assets into this bank account, I make sure that, assets earn some interest, and then I want to make sure that my assets are safe. That functionality is about 150 lines of code on Ethereum right now. And so I think you can, think of that core functionality as something that's real. In terms of all the different ad services and, derivatives products and every single synthetic equity derivative that you could find being traded on Wall Street, we're a long way off from having that. And frankly, like I said, we need regulatory clarity but I do think that what will happen eventually is there'll be some commingling of traditional finance, decentralized finance. And I know this to be a fact that there's very large banks that are finding ways that they can plug in DeFi into their banking offering. After the OCC last year said that DeFi and stablecoins are things that banks could actually plug into. And so they're building out that technology and that functionality right now, where you would be able to put assets like dollars into an account and have it go, be supplied on Aave. And that's kind of one of the core functionalities of Aave Arc. You'd be able to earn 5, 6, 7%. Compound Treasury is doing the exact same thing with their products. That's a order of magnitude difference in what you'd be able to do with basic banking. And so as we get to higher fidelity applications, that complexity will increase. But right now it's starting off pretty small, but definitely real.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you. Great answer.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael, for coming today and share with us on your perspective on DeFi. I personally learned a ton from your insights. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the time and great to meet everybody. Thanks for the thoughtful questions. You guys are definitely knowledgeable about the space. Fun to see.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.